Yeah, the thing that I had bookmarked and I was thinking about, we kind of touched on it a little bit later, but the specific bookmark was um, it. The frame I was trying to set for conversation was if the heart of Agile is just a true set of first principles, and I think it does a good job of reflecting first
Yeah.
principles. And so,
It'll last. It will last a long time. That's for sure.
so if those things are true, and we'll spend another time on the edges of some of it where I think we can still grow. There's more stuff to learn. There's nothing wrong that's there.
I hear you.
Um, but if it was all true, then the question I was going to sort of seed a part of the conversation with is what would have to exist in the environment that the people were working in for them to be able to be successful from those first principles.
Yeah, I hear you. Now, I know you won't forget that, so we can come back to that, right? That's safely bookmarked. You say the word principles, and I don't see them as principles, so I kind of twitch like the conversation's going to slide off in a way that I can't handle if I try to follow the meaning of the word principles.
Yeah.
So say a bit more why you use the word principles. Was it a conscious word, or was it just a placeholder word?
No, I think it's a conscious word. When I was a kid, my dad was a physicist. My father was a rocket scientist. My father helped put men on the moon, right? My dad also put the telemetrics inside of the nuclear reactor that they had at Georgia Tech.
Okay.
And so I learned how to program on a PDP-8 connected to a nuclear reactor in downtown Atlanta, by the way. As an 11-year-old.
All right, as not everybody gets to put on their resume. Right?
So, but one of the things, and my godfather was the head of physics at Georgia Tech, and one of the things that they would talk about is like there's like principles, there's true physical principles underneath things, a lot of physics. So we could say the physics of Agile. I think you've nailed the physics of Agile. When I'm saying first principles, I mean.
Yeah, as we've talked about, right? That's been basically, if there was such a thing as a life work, that's been my life work, is to get the curves, right? This causes that. And the nice thing about a curve is it doesn't tell you which end to be at. It tells the implications of being at one of the ends. And one of the things that I enjoy is literally sliding up and down the curves in different situations and watching the implications of that, right?
Yeah.
So we could call those the principles of Agile, and the word principles fits. Yeah. Now, where I struggle is the heart of Agile's those words are imperatives, and they were chosen as imperatives, quite deliberately. So they're active verbs, present tense, imperative, voice, etc. Blah blah. Collaborate, right? And so I have trouble seeing. Here's where there's something in your head that I would enjoy seeing is if I tell you to collaborate. That doesn't strike me as a principle. I'm telling you to deliver the SOB, right?
Right.
It didn't sound very much like a principle to me. It just, I mean, based on a principle, right? So the principle is that projects go better, things go better as you collaborate better, and things go worse as you collaborate worse, right?
Yes.
And the principle behind the imperative deliver is that as you deliver little pieces and manage the flow and get the feedback, right? You correct, you have the opportunity to correct errors and follow the trail. So those are principles, right? And there's a principle, I guess, underneath each one of the verbs that says the principle is if you pay attention to this, things will get better.
Yes. Okay.
Does that make sense? So that fits the word principle.
Yeah. So I think I'm using the word principle incorrectly. Then it's a category of things that are foundationally true. There's a category of physics of the world that if you don't collaborate, you're not going to get the results you need to when you have to get ideas between brains and solve emerging problems with emerging techniques. You can't do that unless you understand what it means to collaborate.
Maybe you're using it right. So the word principle, one of the problems I've got is it's got two meanings. And people don't sort those two out. And one of them I'm happy with and the other I'm uncomfortable with. And the principles in the Agile Manifesto aren't principles to me. They're assertions.
Right.
And so if I what?
Okay, yeah. So I see your tension with the use of the word that way. Yes.
Yeah. So we say, the principle of, in physics, it's going to be a kind of a curve thing, right? If you do this, that happens, right? And so the way I phrase the principle for the heart of Agile is the principle is this, right? As you collaborate better, things go better. As you collaborate worse, things go worse, right? As you deliver smaller pieces, you have the opportunity for feedback and improvement, right? Right? So those are principles of the sliding variety that let you move, right? The principle says if you go here, you go there, right?
Yeah.
There's another one that says it's valuable if, right? And people use that. My guiding principle is, right? And then it's an assertion.
Right.
And I'm never comfortable with that, but people use the word principle for that, right? It's based on the principle that, I don't know, delivering is good, right? There's no slidiness around that. That's an assertion, right?
Right.
Like the manifesto, the best software architectures come from self-organizing teams. I don't believe that for a heartbeat, right?
I struggle with that belief.
But it's phrased as a truth, right? So these are truths, and they're marked as principles. So they're things we build on, like you said, foundational blocks.
Yeah. So we can use a different word than principle. In my mind, I'm always looking at 3 layers. And by the way, a friend of mine about 15 years ago, I remember sitting in a coffee shop in
Yeah, did he have sort of shorter hair and a shorter beard in those days? Yeah, could happen. I smell this one coming. Yeah, good.
We were both much younger. But yeah. I was talking
we were both much younger. Awesome.
I was talking about assessing everything at 3 layers simultaneously. And it's the sort of principle truth layer. And then it's the application layer. And then it's like the presentation layer. And so when you look at what I'm always trying to operate from, and I find the trouble when I have trouble in conversations because somebody's having a conversation here and I'm trying to have a conversation.
Yeah, typically.
What you and I were doing at the table one day, talking about business analysis, I think was the topic we were going after. And we were talking about just the truths that you have to be aligned around the things you're trying to solve for. And then an application of it, a poor application of it, doesn't make the reality of aligning on value less important. Right.
And I quote that conversation, if I play that back to you. We were in my kitchen, this particular one I'm thinking about, which is maybe a different one than one you're thinking about.
It was the same weekend, but yeah, the same weekend.
Right. I was challenging, so this is on the record, right? And I do say these things, in public. People think that we threw the project managers out of the window when we wrote the Agile Manifesto.
Right.
And the project managers crawled back in the window through the Scrum Master program, right? What they didn't realize is the people we really threw out the window. Because I was in 2002 and 3, I was giving lectures on how to be a project manager, an effective project manager in a rapidly agile context, right? So I think it makes sense, right? As you know. The people we threw out the window were the business analysts.
Yeah, because of
and they never crawled back in again. They're still trying to crawl back in. So we were so effective, they didn't even know, like nobody even knew. They got banned from the surface of the earth, right?
Right.
And so the conversation was for IC Agile was the what do we call a value manager track?
Yes,
that's as a set of skills.
Yeah, because you need those. You need the craft of that, but the role as it was deployed in most large organizations, the presentation of it was very ineffective in most organizations.
Yes, sir. And just to put this on the record, my challenge to you was, we're going to take a 2-person company. We're going to take the founder and a programmer. Mm-hmm. And the founder knows all good founder stuff. So the programmer knows all good. Should there exist a skills development track in IC Agile around value management given this setting? And I would take the case of no, it isn't needed because they just put their heads together and talk. And you would take the side of yes, they do, right? And that was one of the best discussions because you won at the end, right? That it became clear that this skill set we were talking about didn't naturally reside here. So one of the 2 of them would have to go skill up.
Yep.
In the skill area, independent of any role. It would still be only 2 people, but they'd have to skill up in this area, right? In the value management thing. That was one of the sweetest discussions I've ever had.
Oh, cool. It was amazing for me too, to be invited in your presence to have that conversation at that point in my career. It was like a big deal.
Well, you're doing the same thing with the systems versus psyche. And I'm so on the record of like, it's all about attitude. My last client, I'm starting saying we have to put some systems in place to so that the attitude can have, can grow. And they're like fighting me. No, we just want the attitude. And I'm going, no, I just got done talking with Dennis. Back up. We need systems, right? So you're totally screwing with my delivery now.
Well, good. Because good stuff comes out of it.
It's all better.
Yeah.
It's a balancing.
The thing that I was really trying to think about was kind of like with the dissection of the word principles. And I'm saying if those principles are true, if those things have to be in your head to be successful, what do we mean by psyche? What do we mean when we say you have to have the right psyche, the right beliefs? And how do we get the right beliefs in people's heads?
So I don't want to get the beliefs in their heads. I want to get them acting a certain way.
Okay.
I use psyche. So in my talk, the last talk, and it'll be in all future talks, I do the 4 values of the manifesto, and I add a 5th slide, and I said attitudes over structures.
Okay. Oh, that's powerful. Yeah.
Oh, isn't that nice? Right? So you will need interventions that are structural, like literally changing the seating position back in the co-located days, right?
Yeah.
Literally changing the seating. And the irony is I used to consult literally only on structural stuff. I would literally walk into a place and say, move those people around and everything will go better. Nothing but structure, right? But those are the enablers, right? Those are the enabling interventions.
Right.
And what I always have to say is the magic, right? Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, right? You might need processes, you might need tools, but the magic happens in the way that people interact, et cetera, right?
Right.
And so similarly, so you need the structural interventions, but if you want the magic comes, and see here I don't say belief systems, I don't say mindset. I've burned off the word mindset, so I don't use it.
Good.
But attitude we can deal with, because attitude will come out in the interactions, right, in the behaviors. So if you don't mind, I'll drop the word belief.
Okay.
But this is the language I'm living in, right? So we've got attitudes and behaviors. And so your question is, what do you have to put in place, right? And in the discussions with my last clients, it's been if certain structures are in place, they will inhibit the best attitude. They the kindest and the most accurate ways, they put an upper limit on, right? That's the way you have to phrase it, right?
Yes.
You can have the best attitude, but there's an upper limit to what you can get if the structures are fighting against you. Reward programs being number 1 on my list, right?
Yep.
And they're enablers in the sense that when you get good structures or systems in place, it allows the attitude stuff to flow naturally.
Yes.
Are we in agreement here?
Yeah, absolutely. And then what becomes really interesting, because there's in my mind, as I was thinking about psyche in the last 2 weeks, I was thinking about how do you influence behaviors, and I was thinking beliefs, but I'll shift away from that, right? So I'm trying to shape my language too as this is emerging here. But I think about not just like the governance model and how you measure things and visual systems to create shared understanding and measurement systems to assess performance. All those things are part of the system, right? And team designs, who sits together and who's responsible to who. But there's a whole bunch of things around leadership. There's a whole bunch of things around expectations and how what are the rules of delegating? What are the acceptable behaviors or interactions? And I was trying to think about how much of what you talked about is leadership, and is leadership part of the system, or is leadership part of the psyche?
Psyche, I selected only because the alliteration, it's so cute, system versus psyche. And in psyche, I'm not just doing mindset, but basically all of the psychological games that are going on, of which, attitude and interactions and behavior and mindset and all of that would fit, right? But all of the things that are inside a head. And you asked about leadership. right? So if we do that, what elements of leadership are structural, and what elements of leadership are in the personal behaviors and interpersonal behaviors of the person, right? And leadership's a funny word. It's a word that still causes me, some amount of grief. Because you remember, it's been over the last 10, 15 years, managers are bad and leaders are good, right? Et cetera, et cetera.
Actually, bad managers are bad, as are bad leaders, and good managers are
probably. Well, that's the point, and that's why I collected a whole page on my own website about what do good managers do and what do good leaders do, as a distinction, right?
Yep.
And so leader, basically everything gets lumped into leadership. Like lots of stuff gets lumped in there that who knows. So, and David Marquet of Turn the Ship Around fame, yeah?
Yeah, yes.
He actually lives an hour south of me in Sarasota.
Oh, very cool.
And I visited him twice, and I've picked his brains the best I could. And one of the lieutenants from his submarine came and gave a talk at the Heart of Agile conference in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago.
Very nice.
And we picked his brain as much as we could.
Very nice.
So he has a systemic model, if anybody does, for leadership, right? He claims, right? Yep. And Alistair's, ethnographic investigations debunk his stuff as much as I debunk anybody's stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So just so you know how I do that, I saw him and I asked him a zillion questions, and all of his answers were straight out of the book. Like literally, that book is so good, it's incredible. I got one or two tiny details to color a few of the stories in the book, but basically everything out of his mouth, like he was quoting the book. It's how he does it, I don't know. And I said, skeptical me, I go, I have a hunch that only worked once. Like you had a black swan opportunity, a once in a lifetime, and it's never going to happen again. I'm going to float a hypothesis that you can't replicate that in the business world. And he said, well, you're right. Just for starters, because in a business, they don't have to do what the captain says.
Yeah, so it's fascinating to me how much of what's in that book and how much that gets drawn out in our industry as a way to do things. And people don't understand the first principles and systemic things that were in place that made that way of delegating work for him. Does that make sense?
So can I add 2 bits of information you may not have about him and the story, right? The first is, in his book, he actually tried that stuff once before when he was down a notch in the hierarchy. Right. And it literally didn't work. It literally didn't work. Okay. And he was too open about it. Well, it would be nice if you, right? He was the same guy. But to your point, partly there was no system in place. Partly he wasn't practiced. Partly the crew wasn't ready.
Interesting. Yeah.
So I got through. Let's see if I can get through these, because I think these are nice bits of information that you fold into your encyclopedia there. So that failed, first of all. Then, next up, his boss, Admiral whomever, name I can't recall, chose that ship for him, right? Knew him, right? He wasn't an unknown quantity. He'd been through. He had these really strange, Marxist ideas about how to run a nuclear submarine, right? Give everybody autonomous self-control and free expression and, like that on a nuclear submarine. And he was scheduled to go after a boat, and they gave him, I don't know, a year and a half, 6 months, whatever. And he memorized every nut, bolt, torpedo.
Yeah, I know that.
Member, children of the crew members, everything about the ship. And 6 weeks before deployment, they swapped and they gave him a different submarine. Now, why did they do that? Is an interesting question to ask, right? So I floated this to him because, I like to float hypotheses, and I just put them in front of people and see what they say. And I said, I'm floating the theory that your admiral gave you that ship because he knew you had these wacko theories and hypotheses about how to run a ship. So he gave you one that was so bad you couldn't screw it up. right? They were at the bottom.
Yep.
Now that's relevant because they were already at the freaking bottom, right? And he said,
Right.
do weird stuff. And they go, we can't get any worse. Like we're all ready to quit the Navy right now.
Right.
So when we talk about systems versus psyche, the psyche aspect of his new context was super important. He could not have pulled that off if they'd given him the third best submarine in the Navy. He could not have done that on the third best to make it the best.
Yeah, very interesting.
We really had to take people who were broken. They had nothing to lose by doing totally stupid wax stuff that made no sense, but the captain told them to do it, right? So that's in the psyche, right? The second thing is, and this is to your point about systems, and I had this discussion, I think with you, and if not with somebody else. The first change he made, he changed the code in the rule book about who signs off the shore leave.
Right.
And he says it right there. He committed mutiny right there, right? He absolutely committed mutiny. He took a line and he drew it through the rule book and he wrote his own words on top and says the midshipmen or whatever those guys are, get the final say, they sign it off and the person goes. Right? Now, I've had this discussion maybe with Tony Christensen or somebody, yeah, because he was doing this stuff at Royal Bank of Scotland and we're talking about systems. And it's the point, you have to change the rule book.
Right. And there was a muscle there that he was developing, which was a muscle of delegation in a trusted fashion to give people permission to make a decision they hadn't had permission to make before. But
Yeah,
it wasn't a super.
That only worked because he had the system in place, he had the psyche in place.
Right. That's right. Yep. Right.
And so the third piece of information, so yeah, the third piece of information is the guy who was his, whatever, lieutenant. It's in the books. It's his colleague now, right, et cetera. And I asked him, so you like spent 2 years under him and you guys had this like humming machine. Could you ever replicate that with another captain? He goes, no. Since I go to my next captain, I try to play this, we could do the tell me intention. The guy says, shut up and do what I said. He said, I tried 4 or 5 times. I tried every single time I could. He shut me down and said, do it, shut up and do what I said. He said, I ended up, I just shut up and did what he said. Right?
Right.
So this is in the systems versus psyche interplay, right?
Yeah,
When you say leadership, how many aspects of that was his leadership aspect and how much was something else, right? And it's that something else pop is really big.
Yeah, it's so where I was taking it in my mind and thought we'd land, it might be a little bit different as we get into it. What I was taking in my mind is if we want to teach leaders how to more effectively get organizations to be successful, and then I was going to say, what does success mean? Which is like a next question on this. But if we want organizations to be more successful, do we teach leaders you have to build systems and then coach the psyche within it? You have to I think the two things have to co-evolve a little bit.
They do, and this is the interesting part about our discussion.
Yeah. Or do we teach them to go after changing how people think about their work first, and then those people get to sort of evolve their systems? I think in most organizations today, people don't have permission to evolve their systems.
Hang on. You threw some extra words. I was like I had my whole next thing stacked up and you threw some extra words in there. You said evolve their systems. Because like everything I do is on the psyche side and everything you do is on the system side. You keep trying to evolve the system and I keep trying to evolve the psyche. Scrum
might tell a team to go retrospect and figure out what's in the way of you being successful and go change.
That's structural. So let me try something different, right? I just want to show you the difference in the language because like all of your language is structural.
Yeah, I'm very focused on it. Yeah,
you are, and that's fine. That's why we're in this conversation. So I was at a company. I won't. I guess I could say the name. It doesn't matter. So I was at Vodafone Greece. And I had literally the CEO of Vodafone Greece and the CXO and some direct reports. And I don't know, there were like 8 people or 10 people or something like that. And the first thing that I do is I say, hey, there's an interesting way to do an icebreaker. I know you guys all work together, so maybe you haven't done this one before. It's kind of fun. And this came out of a book that I got from Carol Deckers and something about leading. Anyway, doesn't matter. Turns out there's a recognition and competence. You got to do a grid, right? And there's a zone in there where people don't get recognitions for some of their competencies, so some things in which they're competent, right? When you boil this down to a binary, like a really tight question, you can say, name something that you're good at that other people don't recognize you for. That's a super, super question, right? Mm-hmm. So I do that inside the group, and they're all doing this, and this one guy's really funny. He's an executive, so he starts basically just describing his job role. I'm really good at this and this and this and this and this. And you know me, so I interrupt him and I go, excuse me, that's your job description. You're supposed to be good at that. That's why you're in your job. So everybody knows it. So it can't fit in the what you're good at that people don't recognize, because that's what you're good at and they recognize and they expect it from you every day. So come up with something that they don't recognize you for.
Right.
That you're good at. And he goes, right? And he goes and he finds something. We finish the exercise and I go, so we did that. And they go, wow, you know, we really worked together for a long time, many years together, but we didn't know that stuff about each other, right? So yeah, opened up. And rolling onto that, I was talking about, now we're in structural, I'm going like rewards programs, bonuses. I said, executive bonuses often are conflicting, right? And then you can't, right? Quantity versus quality category thing. And you got to fix that. That's structural, right? And then and the CEO goes, we've been going for a while now. He goes, that's interesting. He goes, our bonuses are on us as a team, so we're okay. So, but I can see that as we break down the goals in our different departments, how they get non-collaborative.
Right.
And so he said, I'll take it on as a point that we'll go and reevaluate the way those things are phrased so that we don't inhibit, right?
Yeah.
That's structural.
Yes.
And then the last part of the anecdote is a person whom I won't mention the name of, but he's listening to me tell the story. He says, but Alistair, I work for an organization and everything we do is tied to stockholder value, shareholder value, ROI. He said, you haven't mentioned ROI once. Like, why do these people even stay in the room with you, quite frankly? Like, I don't even understand why they're in the conversation. I said, oh, I treat them like people.
Right.
And they like that. And then they stay. And then they start treating each other like people. And they like it.
And they're more effective because of it.
Well, so back to your question, that was not, that was to your question, which do you first, right? And I wanted to show you the sounds of a psyche discussion, right? And the point is, they just like it. People treating them like people. Right? So they'll go and bend the rules of the organization. They'll chat with each other out of hours. They'll cross responsibility line just to be a mensch with another person, right? So, my consulting career is based off of, I'll start with the psyche side. Now, which are they not going to do? Because I guess I'm not successful at getting them to change the system, right? So I don't try. I don't stick around long enough.
Right.
I say, you ought to do that, and I'm gone 3 days later.
Right. But you're teaching them to think about it differently and to give them some principles to apply as they think about it differently. And you're challenging them to bring their skills to bear. And then as leaders, I would suggest they're going and changing their system.
So, I
made that
maybe on the systems thing, it's a longer pull, right? So you have to be there for a longer time. Like, I'm there for 3 days. I throw pixie dust and,
It's actually, so it's really interesting. In my mind, as I'm pulling back on Yeah, so that actually goes to my third topic that was in my head. But as I'm pulling back on leadership and what you're trying to do is get them to treat each other as humans and then figure out how to make conditions appropriate for this human behavior to produce the results that they want, without putting a lot of rules around what that has to look like. And they're kind of letting them figure it out because they're smart and can figure it out. So you're getting to a systemic solution, or getting them to behave differently towards each other, but they're probably in some regard changing the rules of the game so they can be successful. So that's actually really interesting from a change standpoint, and clearly has to be part of an overall any change effort. I think there's also then a question that's in my mind in our industry in general, but just generally true, is what does success look like? You get them to change, and what's different than it was, and is it they treat each other better, or that they're doing a better exchange of value with their customers and their employees, or that they're making more profit? What does success look like? What are we trying to accomplish?
One of the weird things from the 90s that came out of my interviews was, as you make things nicer for the workers, the productivity improves.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That effect improves. It's not a one-to-one. Like, it's not like you throw them cocaine parties every Thursday and they all get happy, and then productivity improves. But you do those motivational things so they enjoy their work more as they're working, and then productivity improves. So you get both. And I've often have thought, like since the late 90s, I did this research without any speculative beliefs, right? I didn't start from that as a beginning position. What would I have done? I mean, I was lucky. As you make life better for the workers, that their output goes up, right? What would have happened if it had been the opposite? What would have happened if my research showed that you chain people to the desk and you flog them every hour, their productivity goes up? What would I have done? Oh.
Yeah.
So but it's kind of a lucky thing, right? That take for your future, kind of noodling around, length of time that you have to intervene. Because I'm going to claim the people don't want to make the systemic changes. I'm going to assert that, not that I have like your experience.
Yeah.
I
think there's truth in it. And I think there's a tremendous amount of, we end up with a tremendous amount of energy in the organization because we approach it actually by getting them to want it more and more by showing the cause and effect. I think that there's enough momentum in the industry today that people are going, if we're not agile, we're not going to be successful. And we tried these 10 things and it didn't work. So we're now willing to try a little harder to create the conditions. Like, really, a lot of times we're coming in as a fourth attempt to solve this because they tried it without doing what they needed to do. And they're now willing to.
How long does it take? If you think of some of your stories, what's the time duration from the time you suggest like they ought to start changing the system till those elements are actually changed?
If I can't show dramatic improvement inside of 90 days, they're not going to keep us engaged longer to help them move up the curve. So give me an
example of something that you would have them change that shows a result within.
I would go into a project-based organization that was operating without any context of what value meant and working on 10 times more things than they had capacity to do. And I would say, let's form some stable teams. Let's visualize your work and connect it to value so you can work on the most important things and make it flow. Let's just balance capacity and demand. That's base camp 1 for us. Let's just do that for you. And what happens is productivity goes up, predictability goes up, quality goes up, trust gets built in the organization. And all of a sudden, these agile practices like daily stand-ups and scrums and backlogs and things, because they were doing them before, but they didn't have the structural elements in place to get value. All of a sudden they're wearing, and then this concept of autonomy, mastery, and purpose that drives the engagement within the team connects, and other people go, we want more of that.
So it's nice as you've got all the anatomical body parts of all of that labeled.
Yeah.
And what I just heard was they hear those labels and they see what they see, and now you give them the things that they could ask for more of.
Absolutely.
And now, okay, and so, but that was an easy one. I mean, in a sense, it's an easy one because, and I tell stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I go to BBC in London, and this guy says, take a look at our Kanban board. All right, this is Kanban. There's a big, long whiteboard about the length of, your office wall. And he goes, we put up the Kanban board and productivity shot through the roof. And I go, excuse me, that can't happen. All you did was to put notes on a wall. Nobody typed faster, nobody talked fast. Like, tell me how it came about that literally putting sticky notes on a board made productivity go up. Like, convince me. And he says, well, we first did, like, everybody list all the things you're working on, right? Mm-hmm. Up go the sticky notes all over the place, and you find 3 times as many projects in flight as you ever thought about. And they pushed them all over to the left, and they made a hard whip limit of, I don't know, 3 things or whatever, right? That was. And then it was all, then it was all swarming. And nobody got to work on anything that was on the left till there was a space in the one of the 3. And things started getting finished, right?
Right.
Right. So you'll notice I did not talk about cross-functional teams, or what do you call stable teams. I didn't talk about whatever you called about the autonomy. I didn't have all your body parts, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So this is like the lazy, the sloppiest methodology that could ever work, right? That could possibly work, guy, right?
Yeah. But what I need, Alistair, is I need to make it repeatable and show them that we knew what we were doing.
So that's where having all the body parts helps, right? That's the point of having the anatomy.
Yeah.
The cool things you guys have done. So what I heard was you were describing it was you say these keywords, there's like 9 keywords. And what they heard was there are 9 keywords, or a bunch, like more than 6. Right? Just keep saying that 7th one again. What was that again? Say autonomy mastery what? Autonomy mastery what? Autonomy mastery what? Autonomy. Yeah. Give some of that. Let's see what happens, right? Right? So that's what I heard. That's what I heard.
Yeah, so it is, but it is. And I have like 18 or 20 steps like that. So the first 3 are form teams, put the work into a meaningful structure, and then understand how much you can get done and make workflow. Like that's the first 3. And we go all the way up to how am I making better bets, and how am I learning faster from the customer? But the thing is, if you start at the wrong place in that diagnostic, it's really hard to start out learning faster from the customer if you can't actually produce anything. But what's interesting to me is forming a small team and balance capacity and demand, and then having them work in flow. It creates space for collaboration.
Yeah.
It creates break points for them to sit and reflect and improve. Right. It creates opportunities for them to actually.
No, it doesn't. Back up. Tell me that again. If you have flow, does not create space for collaboration reflection.
Creating a stable team creates the opportunity for collaboration.
It's the reflection part. Oh. Nothing creates space for reflection.
Okay.
Prove me wrong.
I think when I am working on 100 things with 10 different teams all at the same time, and we're not all arriving together at a completed thing that we can kind of look at and go, was this hard? Was this easy? What got in the way?
So let's just say you're doing pure Kanban, right? Continuous flow.
Yep.
The problem with continuous flow is there are no breakpoints. It's a machine that runs for a year and a half and drives you mad.
Yeah, that's right. So I think I'm not suggesting then that Kanban is the right thing. I think you have to have breakpoints and points that you build into your model for reflection.
So, okay. But my point is having the flow doesn't create the points for reflection. That one literally has to be added on top.
But I'm going to suggest, fascinating, because my outcome 4 is learn to improve your system. And my belief would be that if I don't have a team with people that I work together with frequently, and a shared set of outcomes that we're going toward, and an ability to kind of get to a point of doneness from time to time, we don't have anything to stop and make sense out of.
I got it, but how are you gonna get the people to insert a reflection ritual?
I'm going to build it into the rules of the game. It's part of my governance model. It's part of my definition. This team meets the second Thursday of every month and reflects on everything I've done, what worked well, what didn't. And because we have a shared understanding of our intent of our team and our design and how we make the workflow, we can then talk about how to improve it.
So I want to do, in terms of Euclid's 5 axioms, right?
Yeah.
You had to add that one, right? That wasn't a natural outcome of anything. You had to add it literally on top of the others.
Absolutely. So that's interesting. I agree. So I agree. But if you add them in the wrong order.
I got you. I just playing, like, I was listening to you, Dennis.
Yeah, that's cool.
I was listening to you.
So one of these things I spent a lot of time on is making it repeatable, making it understandable, but also really thinking about, if I'm trying to manage dependencies and I don't have the ability to have a stable team that can decide how they're going to deliver increments of work, I can't manage dependencies yet. If I'm going to try to make better bets.
No, I got all of that. And you guys have done a marvelous job. And I keep trying to find access to our conversation, right? This is what's going over and over and over around.
That's what I'm trying to, right.
And the only access I've got at the moment, right, out of our conversation is duration. Like, I'm talking to a company and I get yay many 1-hour slots over a voice call, or even if I'm in the same room, it's still only a small number of 1-hour slots, right? Wow. I don't have, like, you have how many people on the ground in one of these places where you're making these systemic changes?
3 to 20, depending on the size of the company.
Correct. And how long does it take you to convince them to make, like, stable cross-functional teams is a tough ask.
It's a price of entry. We don't even start with them until they've decided that they need to be able to do that.
Okay. So at the moment, I'm looking for a number, man.
Yep.
You know me, I'm all about emotions. I'm not about measuring stuff, but I want a number.
So it's interesting.
Joke, Dennis, stop. That was a joke. Humor, that was humor, irony.
What's interesting to me is early on, it took longer to get people to understand they had to do that. Like, they just didn't believe it.
Right.
But more and more people have struggled, and now they go, okay, we're willing to try it. It's kind of like, what made me think of it is the David Marquette story. Like we can't get any worse, so we might as well try doing that. We've tried everything else.
Oh my God, I have a story from, and I'm allowed to tell at this point in time, Fireman's Fund Insurance Company, because I don't consult for insurance companies because they never deliver anything. But I was there in a long gig for like 5-6 weeks doing just use cases. And the project manager of this project he's like, I don't know, 8-9 months from retiring, 64 years old. He's just, waiting to jump out. And he's showing me his slide deck. And I said, I told him I don't consult insurance companies because they don't deliver anything. But I'll talk to you about what you're doing. Anyway, so and he literally put that in his talk. Alistair does not consult. He literally put that in all of his talk. But I said, you're doing incremental development, right, with 3-month deliveries or whatever, right, for the first time ever in your life. This is an insurance company. They never do that. I go, what got you to try that? He said, I've tried everything else.
Yeah.
I said, this guy is 64 years old. He's 1 foot out the door and retire. The last thing left at the bottom of the barrel that he's going to try just before he retires is incremental development. So holy smokes.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. So my sort of thought process is that the underlying physics of what's necessary for us to solve these types of problems are just true. And so and you're not going to get it if you don't do these things. So if you don't have relatively stable teams and you don't have clarity on what value is, and you're not delivering a way to get feedback and no way to measure it, you're just not going to be able to solve the class of problems you're trying to solve. No amount of ceremony or beliefs, or to a certain aspect, behaviors in a system that doesn't provide those. Like, I can act exactly this way in a projectized, working on 10 things at the same time, being pulled in a million directions, as I am in a stable team with a clear backlog and permission to balance capacity and demand. I'm going to get the results out of this one, but not out of this one.
That's cute. It's cute. I like it. What's really interesting is your stuff's fabulous. I'm jealous. I'm envious. I have absolutely no interest in learning how to regurgitate any of that stuff.
What's really,
I have the attention span of a gnat these days. So,
but what's fascinating, Alistair, is how much influence you had on Mike and I early on in our careers.
I know.
Led us to getting here. No.
Yeah, but it's different personalities, like I show up and I throw dust in the air and everybody feels happy and, they go off afterwards and say, let's get some more of that. Right.
Yeah.
And then they try to do the same in their organization. And there's a positive ripple effect, right? So in the attitudes bucket, we've got Craig Brown, who's only got one drum he ever beats. There's only one tool. It's only one hammer in his tool belt. And that's called go out for a pub crawl.
Yep.
That's it. That's all he got. That's all he got. The man has turned company after company around, bigger and bigger companies, more and more global. That's all he ever does is take him out for a pub crawl, right? So this isn't structural. This is how far you can get on a purely attitude, right, psyche basis. Literally informal, like just go out on a pub crawl, right? Boom, boom, boom. So he's the example of like literally what you can do on the one side.
Right.
And you guys are what you can do on the other side. It's like, it's wonderful.
What's interesting to me is that the danger that we run into as we scale and kind of move away from the personality of Dennis and Mike because there's still a culture of sort of, it's still gravitas at the end of the day. It's still really Psyche. I'm going to trust Dennis to go do this.
Yep.
So it's still some Alistair magic dust.
Totally.
I just have some patterns to go delegate it to get it.
Well, you've got that. Well, you've got the right, your system's language plus your wonderful gray, goatee.
Pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very convincing, man. I'm buying 6 of whatever you're selling. I don't care. Right, just give me a 6-pack.
But I think the danger that we run into is if we don't pay attention to the psyche. And
let me ask you a question. I'm gonna break it. I'm gonna do my usual thing. I had for my PhD dissertation the best question ever.
Okay, I'm ready.
Written in the margin of one of my paragraphs, and I was saying blah blah blah. We did this and this stuff worked. Okay, and in the margin he wrote, "Was it the advice or was it the advisor?"
Well, that is the challenge of scaling leading agile. Is how do we move it from the advisor to the advisor? How do you build scale? And
and now we're in the systems versus psyche, right? That's where we're right there. So let me shift the conversation. All right. Take you out of the picture. Is there anybody besides you who can sell and install these systemic changes?
We're getting there.
That means no.
Yeah. Install. Install. We're getting where more and more people install. I'm totally focused on building a methodology team now, not an implementation, not a delivery team, but a methodology team that can go tell these stories and create the vision at the top that makes it work.
So you've got the language slides. What you need is another person who's got the right gravitas to sell it.
Yep.
Right? There was a guy, apropos advice versus advisor. One of the most marvelous experiences I had, I was at company X. I can't say what X is in this particular case, and they did trading systems and financials, and those guys move really fast, right? And I know it's 4 o'clock, and you probably have another call.
No, I just deferred it. Okay.
Well, we do this in the next 10 minutes. We could wrap it up because we should. But anyway, so I was going to talk about use cases, right? And it was a show all about use cases, right? So I was going to talk about my stuff. The guy who gave before was giving a case study, and his story was, he needed the traders to participate in the writing of the use cases, right? And traders, like, they're busy people. They're trading, and millions or billions of dollars per minute or per hour or per day or whatever, right? They don't have any time. These guys they're local. And so he says to them, "Hey guys, we're going to write some use cases and build you a system that you'll love and use and blah blah blah. But we need you to show up and help write the use cases." And they told him, "Yeah, we don't have time for that." And he said, I got that. You guys are very busy. And so we're busy too, So when you have time to help us write the use cases, we'll make time to build you a system. And eventually they struck a deal, and it was 6 a.m, and he brought him the coffee and the donuts, and they were doing all the stuff before the stock market opened, et cetera. At the end of his talk, people were rushing up from this big, financial company, rushing up to the stage and saying, "How do we do that in our department? And I said, "You need him."
Right.
him. You need it. It's not a method. You need that guy who could stare at the traders in the face and say, when you make time to help write the use cases, we'll make time to write you some software, right? Who could pull that off? You need him, right? So this is advice versus advisor.
Yep.
Setting, right?
So it's really interesting, and it is the conversation all the time. Like I can give all the tools in the world, but what you're trying to accomplish with those tools is different. The long leg of this for us as we grow is teaching people to be fighter pilots, not how to build fighters, right? How to fly the fighter in combat. That's not a great example, but
no. That's very good because there's a minimum skill level. Dexterity, smart, blah, 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 attitude, personality, blah, blah, a fighter pilot, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't take the what are those big heavy planes that fly freight? Are they C-47s or what are those things called?
The C5.
C5, right? Right. So your C5 pilot is not. You don't take your C5 pilot and have them do a fighter plane, right, or vice versa, right? So yeah.
Yeah, my dad hung the telemetrics on the C5A, the very first one ever built here in Lockheed. And I actually had dinner with Maynard Jackson inside of an airplane with like 200 people. It was such a giant plane. I was like 5 or 6, but I remember how big that plane was inside. And as a little kid, it's right. But it really is a big aircraft. But yeah, so
that's pretty cool. So my intention all the time now, I'm growing my language around systems, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm immediately running into is the resistance. Like I immediately felt it. I did it with this client recently. I started even saying you need to put certain structural elements like, attitude versus structures. There's some structural elements you have to put in place. I'm using that instead of the word systems, right?
Good.
And man, they don't want to go there. They don't want to go there so bad. They'll do like any amount of personal charisma thingy, so they don't have to go to the structural elements.
I like what you added to the manifesto, your 5th attribute. And then we've talked about this before, but the way that I flip it when I have the conversation, I only want to put enough structure in to make sure I get the right.
I
want to put it right. So you flip it.
Yeah, right.
Have enough of it. And it actually says that if you read it, while we value the things on the right.
Sufficient in order to,
Yeah.
Hey, do you have any more bookmarks? It's been an hour. We'll close this off, wrap it up.
No, I'll come back. I'll come back if you're up for it and talk again in 2 weeks. I might seed you another thought process I was having.
Yeah.
But I really think this concept of if what we're trying, if an avenue to explore is how do we develop leaders to be able to go lead this stuff, which is kind of the path you were heading down.
Let's go back to that question again. Oh my God, that's the bookmark for next time. Straight up, you can remember it.
Yep.
How do we build leaders? Because now, damn. Because to me, because I'm so biased, right? Leader is all personality.
Yeah.
Structure. Right. But you would say, well, if you don't have sufficient structure too, they can't do leader of, right?
Yeah. So what are we teaching them to do? And why are we teaching them to think about it? And my challenge with the way that Marquette talks about leadership is that you can't take what he did and drop it somewhere. Right. So what is the actual pattern of that? Because it is this balance, but we have to teach them to look at the two, and we have to teach them to evaluate the two. And it can't be personality driven, or when that person leaves, everything falls apart. Well,
everything does fall apart. It fell apart the moment that he left. I mean, not the moment he left, but it did fall apart.
Yep.
And Neil Nicolais, and I get to quote him on this, totally changed the culture of an organization from fear-based to trust-based when he was CIO of this place. And I said, congratulations. I've never seen anybody change the culture like normally when they leave, the culture goes. He goes, I have bad news for you. 6 months after I left, they were fear-based and lost everything I gave them.
Yeah.
I talk about the push to pull umbrella. Have you seen me do that one?
Mm-hmm.
Theory X, Theory Y. So stock markets, Theory X, pressure based on the CEO, inescapable truth of public companies, right? Yeah. Best performance is from Theory Y, quiet space, choosing, selecting at the bottom. That means irrevocably that some manager has to be the umbrella, the converter from push to pull.
Yep.
And that was him. And he goes, oh my God. He said to Jonathan, he says, I like talking to Alistair. always explains to me what it was I just did. I never, I think that's a good thing. But he's so awesome. If I can decode him and pass it back, right? And he goes, yeah, that's what I did. Then I can pass that to somebody else.